this summer, we discovered that my son's passport was going to expire. And it was going to expire sometime, it's actually in around the January, February time frame. But he was going to be away at school the whole time, and normally you would mail in your passport and get it renewed. But he wouldn't have enough time in the U.S. while he was home to renew his passport through the mail system, and he's going to school in Canada. So we found out, well, you can actually get your passport renewed in 1 or 2 days time period if you go in person to the passport agency. So I went online and I booked a reservation to go to the passport agency in Seattle. And I thought, well, okay, you know how traffic goes. I'll do about 10 o'clock in the morning or around that time period so that you're not in the rush hour and it's not the end of the day, because who knows how long this is going to take. So I scheduled this and everything. And then I told my son the date, and he said, "Oh, Dad, but that's right in the middle of this thing I want to go see." And I said, "Well, I'm sorry about that, but it's it's scheduled already. I can't change this. It's kind of hard sometimes to get an appointment." So the morning of the appointment, we go down to Seattle, and we went down early so we could get parking and everything. And we went to the inside the passport agency, and I said, "Well, if this goes quickly, and sometimes when you're doing things that you're standing in line and waiting for others, it doesn't go quickly. But if it goes quickly, maybe you'll get to go to this event you wanted to see." And so we went in and got our did the thing at the passport, the windows and everything, and it actually went really quick. You take a number and go up to the window, and it surprisingly went really quick. And so we got out way ahead of when we had planned on, and so I said, "Well, hey, I think we're going to make it. You can go see this event you wanted to see." And so we went outside, and we walked out on the street, and there were actually quite a few other people out there. Whoops, I didn't, wrong direction. I don't know if you can see this, but this is kind of downtown Seattle, and there was crowds out on the street. I don't know if you remember or you know where you were at on this day. This is August 21, 2017, this summer. And what everyone was doing out there was this. They were looking at the solar eclipse, right? I don't know if you remember where you were at that day, but everyone was out there, and people had their special glasses, and they were trying to look at the sun. What happens is, you can see in the picture there, but the moon goes right in front of the sun and kind of blocks the sun. And this was a rare event in this part of the world. It doesn't happen very often. Some people I know actually traveled into Oregon to places where it would be the total eclipse, and they would camp out, or they would book a hotel room, and people were charging outrageous prices, hotel rooms to go see the solar eclipse. Some people would fly in airplanes, all kinds of things. But this big fascination with the solar eclipse, right? And why, Well, it doesn't happen very often, but if you think about it, the sun is kind of a huge part of life on this earth. Without the sun, without that light, things wouldn't grow. You couldn't see. Think of living at dark all the time. My brother lives in Alaska, and up there in the winter, it's dark almost all day. Because of how far north they are. But light is such an important part in our lives. And I got to thinking, I was doing several other things this summer that involved light. And so I thought I'd share this morning with you some passages in the Bible that talked about light and what light is and how that relates to our Christian life. And I'll tell or relate some illustrations or stories along the way how things I was working on this summer got me to thinking of the parallels between light and the Christian life. So I hope it'll be of benefit to you. The first thing we want to look at, and I'd invite you to take out your Bibles, I'm going to have the text on the screen, but I'm not going to have all the words. So as we come across the text, I'll open and read the actual text. But first of all, who or what is light? If we start out, the very first part of the Bible, the start of the Bible talks about creation. And so we read in Genesis, in chapter 1 there, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was without shape and empty, and darkness was over the surface of the watery deep, but the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the water. God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light. God saw that the light was good, so God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day and the darkness night. There was evening and there was morning, making the first day." So first of all, we have from the very beginning of the world, God created light. It was the first thing he created. And this is a physical kind of light, right? You know, and we can relate to that with the sun and the moon. But light, a physical light, and God created it. In the Bible, we find that light is also used as a metaphor a lot for righteousness and goodness. And then if you think of, well, what's the opposite of righteousness or goodness, badness? Well, that would be dark, right? So we're going to find that in a lot of the texts we read this morning, it talks both about light and about darkness. If we turn to 1 John 1 verse 5, so 1 John 1:5, "Now this is the gospel message we have heard from him and announced to you, God is light. In him there is no darkness at all." So this is kind of interesting. So it says that God is light, and also that's the gospel message. The gospel message is that we've heard from God, announced to you that God is light and there's no darkness at all. If we turn to John chapter 8, verse 12, so John chapter 8, verse 12, "Then Jesus spoke out again, 'I am the light of the world. The one who follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life.'" So Jesus is the light of the world. Whoops, did I skip a couple here? Oh, no, I didn't. All right. So Jesus is the light of the world. So we have God is light, Jesus is light. What about in Psalms? If we turn to Psalms, got a couple texts there in Psalms 119. So Psalms 119, verses 105 and then 130. 119, 105. "Your word is a lamp to walk by and a light to illuminate my path." And then in 119, verse 130, "Your instructions are a doorway through which light shines. They give insight to the untrained." So here it's not just that God is light and Jesus is light, but God's word is light to us. His written word, his spoken word is light for us. What about our need for light? If we looked at that passage in Psalm 119, 105, it's a lamp unto our feet and a light unto our path. And we can't see without light where we're going normally. I don't know if you've done any camping, if you've gone camping and then invariably I'll go camping and I'll get there and I've forgotten to bring my flashlight, and it gets dark, and then you're stumbling around and you hope you don't trip over your tent stake or whatever it is, or because you've forgotten your flashlight. So we need a light to see where we're going. Another thing I can remember is, I don't know if you've ever tried this, but if you've gone into a room at night, turned out the lights in a place where it's totally dark. I mean, totally dark. You can't see anything. No light from the stars or the moon. No watch that has a light on it or anything. No reflections. But your eyes try and open wider and wider to see something, and they can't see anything because there's no light. It doesn't matter how wide you try and open your eyes. You're just trying to see something and you can't. But if someone cracks the door open just a little bit and some light comes in from somewhere, all of a sudden you can see something. So we need light to find our path, to see where we're going, and that's a great analogy for the Christian life as well. If we turn to John 8:12 again. So again, I'm reading there. When Jesus spoke out again, I am the light of the world. And after he says that he's the light of the world, he says, the one who follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. So he intends us to follow him. We need the light to see our way, but we need to follow the light. Not just realize it's there, but actually follow it. It kind of reminded me of a story because sometimes we're a little stubborn about this, and you may have heard this story before, but the story is of a ship at night that's out in the dark and sees a light out in the distance and is headed towards the light and realizes, it thinks it's another ship, and tries to contact them on the radio and saying, hey, please turn because we're coming your way. We don't want to run into you. Turn to the south. And then they radio back, no, you turn to the north. We don't want to turn, you turn. And so they went back again, we're this big ship. We think we have the right of way. Please turn to the south. And then they get a message back and says, turn to the north. We're a lighthouse. Okay, but so often we are the ones that want to control our direction. There's the light there that's telling us, warning us of where we should go or not go, but we still think or want to do what we want to do. And so we have to keep in mind that God is the light, and we need to let him control our path or where we're headed, and not try and get in the way or have our own way doing this. If we turn to 1 John 1, 5 verse 7, this talks about some more about living in the light. So 1 John 1, verses 5 to 7. Again, this starts out, now this is the gospel message. We have heard from him and announced to you, God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. So we read this already, but now we're going to read a little more about the rest of it. If we say we have fellowship with him, and yet keep on walking in the darkness, we are lying and not practicing the truth. But if we walk in the light as he himself is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus, his Son, cleanses us from all sin. So here we know what the gospel is to follow Jesus in the light, and yet it's talking about people that say they have fellowship with him, but then they're still walking in the darkness. So they're still got this attraction to bad or evil or sinful things. They claim they're following him, but they're lying about it. They're not really walking in the light. In Colossians, Paul has a prayer here he has for the growth of the church. It's an interesting passage. I can turn here to Colossians. So Colossians chapter 1, verses 9 through 14. For this reason we also, from the day we heard about you, have not ceased praying for you and asking God to fill you with the knowledge of his will in all spiritual wisdom and understanding, so that you may live worthily of the Lord and please him in all respects, bearing fruit in every good deed, growing in the knowledge of God, being strengthened with all power according to his glorious might, for the display of all patience and steadfastness, joyfully giving thanks to the Father who has qualified you to share in the saints' inheritance in the light. He delivered us from the power of darkness and transformed us to the kingdom of the Son he loves, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. So this is definitely a text talking about a change, a life living in light and not in darkness. It's not just that you see the light, but actually you're changed and living a good life. And he's praying that the church will be like this. In Ephesians chapter 5, verse 7 to 14, we have another text here talking about living in the light. Ephesians chapter 5, verse, actually I'll start with verse 6 through 14. Let nobody deceive you with empty words, for because of these things God's wrath comes on the sons of disobedience. Therefore do not be partakers with them, for you were at one time darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of the light. For the fruit of the light consists in all goodness, righteousness, and truth, trying to learn what is pleasing to the Lord. Do not participate in the unfruitful deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. For the things they do in secret are shameful, even to mention. But all things being exposed by the light are made evident. For everything made evident is light, and for this reason it says, Awake, O sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. So it's talking again about us walking in the light, and actually in this case exposing darkness. So when darkness and light have this big contrast, right? And so it's talking about that. So I was talking a little bit earlier about some things I did. I was doing some things this summer that got me thinking about this topic a little bit. And so I'm going to share a few of those with you right now. So this summer, a fellow coworker of mine got some solar panels installed on his house. And he said, you need to check this out. And so I started checking it out. And sure enough, you can get these incentives to install solar panels on your house. And in the long term, you can save money. So I decided, I wonder if I could do that at my house. So I got the contractors that do this sort of thing to come to the house. And they evaluated my house and my site. And they said, yep, I think we could do it. But you have a problem. You have some big, tall trees. And there's one tree in particular was right beside the house. And if you really want to install solar here, you're going to have to take out this tree. Now, I kind of like trees. I hate to cut trees. But this particular tree, we'd actually talked about getting rid of in the past. It's very close to the house. If it fell over, that would be really bad. It drops needles all over the roof, all these kinds of things. But I'd like this tree, and so I just never got around to removing it. It looked nice by the house, but anyway, we decided to go forward with the project, so we ended up actually taking out this big tree. You can see it there. It's right beside the garage. And you can imagine the sun trying to shine down on solar panels, and this tree would just be blocking everything, right? And so they came out, and this is after they cut the tree down. But how often is that like that in our lives, right? If we have something in our life that either we like, we have this desire for, that we know isn't good for us or for our Christian walk, and it's blocking the light from God, from the Word of God. We know it's not right. Sometimes it's not really bad thing, but it's something getting in a way, right, between our relationship with God and us. And are we reluctant and we keep putting it off, kind of like I did, where we probably should have had this removed a while back, or does it take some event that comes along, in my case, the solar panel installation, to where we say, yep, we really do need to get rid of it? But that was one thing that popped in my mind this summer as I was thinking about some of these is, do we have something getting in the way between God's light and our relationship with Him? Are we reflecting God's light? This was another thing that I got to thinking of. If we look in Matthew chapter 5, verses 14 through 16. So right before this, it talks about you're the salt of the earth, but here it says, "You are the light of the world. A city located on a hill cannot be hidden. People do not light a lamp, put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before people, so that they can see your good deeds and give honor to your Father in heaven." So if we are focusing on Christ and have a relationship with Him, that ought to be reflected in our life so that we are a light then to others. And it's saying that here, that we're to be a light to others around us. And I gotta, if you're a light to someone around you, and to me it's this analogy of reflecting the light, because I myself am not the light. God or Christ is the light, and I have to reflect that. And I was thinking of a story or a time when I was growing up in the Philippines, and we had a case where we lived was on the edge of some hilly area, and then there was this big valley, and across the valley there were some other mountains. And we had the college I went to had some mission schools that were in those mountains across the valley. And at that time, we didn't have things like cell phones like we have today. We didn't even have radios at that time. And so my dad came up with this idea of communicating across the valley with these mission schools using light. And what it was, I don't know if you've seen them at all, but they were signaling mirrors. And sometimes they use these in the military or different, survival or whatever. And what they are is you take a kind of a piece of glass, and there's a little hole in there, and it's built just the right way, and you can kind of aim it to where you want to signal, and it reflects the sunlight in a very focused way, and you can kind of do this with it, and you'll see a flash of light. I don't know if you've sometimes, light hits a window just the right way, and it flashes you in your eyes or something like that, but that's the principle of it. And so you could take these signaling mirrors and just aim them just right and flash it, and you can see that flash of light for miles. And so that was the idea, that we could signal clear across the valley of, tens of miles away, and they could see this, and you could do like Morse code or something like that, to say, well, I'm okay, or I need help, or whatever. You wouldn't be long messages, but there was a way of communicating. And so if you think about that, it's reflecting. Without the sun, you couldn't do that signaling. You couldn't do that communication. You couldn't reflect. And it's similar in our Christian life, that we need to reflect the light from God to those around us. So these are the solar panels they ended up installing on my roof. And there's a couple other illustrations about this. One thing is that you can't just put the panel out in any orientation, right? It matters as to which direction it faces. If the sun comes up in the it comes up in the east and then sets in the west, and so usually, if you were to face your panels pointing north, that would probably be really bad. What they actually recommend is you want them slightly south, so that when the sun comes up, and it starts out, if my panels are like this, and this is facing south, if the sun comes up and it goes down over here, it can kind of see it the whole time, right? And in the in the summer, the sun's going to be directly overhead here. In the winter, it's going to go more this way, And so by having it slightly south, you catch more of the sun the whole year round. Now, if I'm pointed just east, well, I get the morning sun, but in the afternoon, I don't get the sun, right? And the same way, if you face just west, and the worst is if you face north, because in the winter, you don't get anything. Now, if you're in the southern hemisphere, it might be better. But so it mattered a lot as to the direction my house was facing, and they actually, planned it all out as to, took meter readings and everything. Well, where's the best place to put these panels so that they can focus on the light? And I got to thinking, well, it's the same with our Christian life, right? Do we turn our attention or intentionally focus on Christ, or are we focused on what we want in life, our own desires, which may not, you're not going to get, the reason you want to focus to the light is you get the best power, the best electricity out of it if you're got that direct focus. You can still have light around, but if it's not directly focused on it, you're not going to get the power from it. And I got to thinking that's very, very much the same with our Christian life. If we're not focused or turned in the direction of Christ, we're letting other things distract us that we're more interested in. We're not going to get the power out of that relationship. We may get something, and depends on, but the ideal is to be really focused on Christ and oriented towards Him. And then the obvious one I talked about was getting rid of the obstacles. I still have a little problem now because in the winter, as it's getting more winter, I have a few other trees, and they block it too. The other thing, I don't know if some of you, probably most of you were here this summer, and you remember all the fires we had around and the smoke? Well, that was terrible for solar because it blocked the sun, and it didn't matter the orientation I was in. It was blocked so much that no matter which way it turned, you just weren't getting any power out of it. And there's some things in our lives that we have that block that communication with Christ, or that relationship, and so that gets in the way of the light and how it can change our lives. I thought I'd close with this text, and I found this one kind of very interesting, actually. But in the end, it's our choice. Are we going to follow the light or not? And if you turn to John chapter 3, verse 16, we're all familiar with John chapter 3, verse 16, right? For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him would not perish but have everlasting life, right? But if we read the rest, some text right after that, it's kind of fascinating, or at least I thought it was. So then, continuing on in verse 17, for God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world should be saved through him. The one who believes in him is not condemned. The one who does not believe has been condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of the one and only Son of God. And here's what I found interesting. Now this is the basis for judging. So this is the basis for judging. That the light has come into the world, and people loved the darkness rather than the light, because their deeds were evil. For everyone who does evil deeds hates the light, and does not come to the light, so that their deeds will not be exposed. But the one who practices the truth comes to the light, so that it may be plainly evident that his deeds have been done in God. So we have this wonderful passage about whoever believes in him will not perish. And then it's saying the basis for judging is that they're given light, but they loved the darkness. They didn't want to turn to the light. And I think that so often is the case in our lives. We may become aware of the light, or we're given the light of Jesus in our lives, but we choose to love or want to follow the darkness instead of the light. And it's usually our own desires or our own choices that are the result of that. And so I think it comes down to that. What is our choice in our life? Are we going to choose to follow God and the light he's given us through his word, through his example, through our relationship with him in our life? Or are we going to choose to follow darkness? Please bow with me as we pray. Dear Jesus, I just want to thank you for all the illustrations you have to us in the Bible, and for coming to this world to die for us, for being a light to us in our lives. And please help us to choose to follow you and to follow the light you've given us. We ask in your name. Amen.